Hello.
Good hair.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Kind of got a similar bluish vibe.
Yeah. Yep. Mine needs to be redone, but fortunately the indigenous in me, it's just dark. So I think that we're gonna end up having the
I
same hair by the time this is over.
Mine was just this color, and then I thought I was gonna add some more blue up here so it wouldn't look like I hadn't dyed it in forever, and then go green instead. So I've got the two.
Fantastic. We'll just pretend that it happened on purpose.
Right. My phone is definitely gonna fall over. I've got it propped up on a series of boxes here.
I have tried the like every angle thing, and I've come to the realization that I have to just hold on to it. So
That might be what this turns into. I've been sitting here and like, okay, cool, I've got this. I can figure this out, right? Nah.
No, we're all just making it up as we go. Okay, so first off, everybody signed on here expecting to see Destiny, and I am for sure not Destiny. My name is Allison. I'm on the board for New Wave Feminists. I think my technical title is the secretary, but I have recently started going out on the speaking circuit with Destiny. I did some stuff at the Supreme Court and on the Hill. I lived in DC on the Hill for a while, and so now that we're all in quarantine, we are here tonight with Kat Murti, who is a libertarian and a feminist. She is the executive director of Feminists for Liberty. I was checking to make sure that I said the right name. Feminists for Liberty, which is a grassroots nonprofit which promotes liberty and gender justice for all. So welcome tonight. Delighted to have you. Absolutely. So, one of the things that we should probably just get out of the way right up front is that New Wave Feminists is a pro-life feminist organization. And as far as I understand it, your organization is pro-choice.
Yes, so Feminists for Liberty, our little call line, I guess what we would say, we consider ourselves anti-statism, anti-sexism, pro-markets, and pro-choice in
Okay.
So we are a libertarian group, so we really do view it as choice in everything, not just on reproductive justice. When it comes to abortion specifically, I'm personally pro-life.
Okay.
However, as a libertarian feminist, I oppose government getting in the way and abortion bans, things like that. As a politically pro-choice, personally pro-life person, I believe in changing the culture in ways that people don't feel that they have to have an abortion in situations, which is everything from making sure that we have better sex ed available to folks, making sure that people of all ages are able to access birth control, making sure birth control is OTC and things like that. But also just changing culture in a way that young, poor, single moms are not pressured into not having children that are actually wanted, into looking at the ways in which society punishes parents, but specifically female parents, for being parents, holds them back. We have mommy tracking, we have all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that if we, as a personally pro-life person who does not think that government bans will stop abortion, I think that's the way to go about it.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna jump into the middle. We had talked a little bit ahead of time about what we might discuss, and so I'm actually going to skip into the middle and get into this, because one of the am I back?
I hear you. Yeah, there you are.
Okay. Oh, you guys don't want to see that. No, don't. Oh. So
I could literally see a series of shoe boxes.
One of the common misconceptions about libertarians is that we all want to see the state crumble into a heap, that effectively that we're all anarchists. And so one of the things that I heard you say there was that you believe that it is our role and responsibility to remove some of the penalties that women encounter when they are making an abortion or otherwise choice. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, from a libertarian perspective, which would see in general a significant decrease in statism, in government mandate and control. If you could talk a little bit about how does libertarian feminism work when we are effectively talking about overcoming people's inherent biases, if people have done a bad job thus far?
Yeah. There's a lot to tackle there, but I'm gonna start with that last bit that you talked about. So libertarian feminists do see a lot of the same problems with society that feminists as a whole do. Mm-hmm. However, we look at all of the evidence that over time it hasn't been the state that's helped make women and people of all genders more free. It's been the state getting out of the way. So I certainly understand why people believe that using the state, you can contradict these sort of cultural problems that come up, right?
You can legislate morality.
Right, you can legislate morality. But the problem is that the state will always be behind morality. So if we're able to change the culture in a way that is more feminist, those laws that we've already baked in, they hold that process back, right? And so as a libertarian feminist, I believe that while there are any number of different forces that do hold people back on sex and gender lines, the state has historically and currently been the biggest and worst of them.
Done a terrible job.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And it doesn't address these problems. Let's even get back to, we started off this conversation talking about my beliefs as someone who's both pro-life and politically pro-choice. Sure. One of the biggest things, the state blocks women from getting access to birth control. It's not OTC, right? The vast majority of women who do get pregnant and aren't on birth control because they weren't able to afford the appointments to go to the doctor every year, or they weren't able to take the time and have the ability to do it, right? So I think that there are a lot of ways in which the state actually does hold women back, just on that issue, but across the board. And I think you're right. You talked a little bit about anarchy versus libertarianism. I actually am ideologically an anarchist, but I'm not the kind of person who would want. I don't want to watch the world burn, right? I oppose the state because I think the state hurts people and it stops people from being able to live their own best lives, right? And so I don't want to live in a worse world. I want to live in a better world. And for me, part of that is allowing people to make their own choices and to have that kind of freedom. And part of that also, as an activist, means modeling those kinds of things, making sure that in our own communities, we're not doing things to hold women back because they have children, making sure that we have, our own organizations are not pushing those kinds of things, making sure that we are providing support to other people and we're building that sort of community, because we don't need the state. What we actually need is each other, and we need to be able to help each other out.
Right. And so kind of there's a pervasive idea in libertarianism that the free market will self-regulate itself. And the problem is not that we have a free market and it is not regulating itself. The problem is that we don't have a free market at all. Yeah. Because we have things like government control, and we have crony capitalism, and we have regulations which prohibit physicians who are trained in the US from practicing across state lines.
Right. Yeah.
And so
physicians from doing telehealth until very recently, they've sort of been trying to change that because of our current situation. But yeah.
And so what do you think it is that we could be doing to, especially in this time of unprecedented government overreach, especially, because we're talking about coronavirus and we're talking about, authoritarian is kind of, I think, generous. I think that we could go so far as to say medieval government overstep into the personal lives of Americans and how they go about their days, how they're engaging in worship. And so what do you think, first of all, what is the proper role of government in a crisis situation? And then what should be our response culturally in order to reclaim some of that power and demonstrate competency in such?
Well, I can tell you the proper role of government certainly isn't what the government has been doing. I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing here with the coronavirus now have been worsened by government mismanagement. For a long time, information wasn't getting out. We already know that there's been misinformation. For instance, with masks, the CDC did know that masks stop the spread. However, they were worried that they would not have enough masks and therefore told everyone that they don't stop the spread, which was knowingly incorrect information, right? So there's a lot of things like that. For the longest time, tests were being blocked within the US because the CDC wanted to create its own test. That test ended up being faulty, so they weren't even able to use it before they started opening that up. We're now looking at government passing tariffs and things like that, doing things to try to stop medical equipment from leaving the US, but also from being able to get back into the US. We have all sorts of issues across the board. Doctors are complaining that that they're worried about the spread of COVID, specifically amongst immigrant communities, because they're scared to come and ask for help. They don't want to get locked up in a detention camp where people are dying, and
not to mention what's happening with it in our prison systems.
Exactly, right. And I think where the government has made the right steps around that have been things like opening up the ability for companies to start testing vaccines and start developing vaccines or start developing tests. Some of the prison systems have allowed low-level nonviolent offenders out of the system. Of course, I would suggest that then that brings up the question, why were they locked up in the first place? But, right.
Don't ask too many questions you don't want to know the answer to.
I mean, I certainly understand in a time like this, some sort of coordinated response can certainly be helpful, I think. But the government has shown us they're not doing a great job of that. And as far as what we as libertarians can do, I mean, I think that there's some information out there about things like social distancing, covering your face, trying to make sure not to do things that spread the virus, right? And I think we can model a lot of that ourselves. However, you're right. We're also seeing a lot of huge violations of civil liberties. I think one issue that this has really come up with, a lot of people have been responding to some of the protests that we've seen in the last couple of days. People are upset because they're being forced to stay in their homes. A lot of people, a massive amount of Americans have lost their jobs, and they're freaking out about it, right? And I don't think that they're wrong to protest that. However, I will say, at the same time, it doesn't strike me as a very smart or a protest or a well thought out protest when the way that they're protesting this is by going out, gathering in large groups without their faces covered, blocking ambulances from getting into hospitals. I was just saying this earlier. I think it would actually be really cool if the same people who wanted to protest, if they'd done something where, for instance, they wanted to cover their faces, everybody stand 10 feet apart all across the town. That would be a striking image, right? And it's where they're actually following through with all of those recommendations, and they're showing, hey, we actually are voluntarily trying to stop the spread of this, but also we have a problem with the state coming in and shutting down the economy, shutting down these kinds of things too. Because I think it's very fair to say that this is an external threat. It's a threat that we don't have control over, right? And I think you can say that the spread of a virus is scary and is important, and we can't stop it right now, but we know that there are ways to do it. And I think that there are ways that we can voluntarily try to do so, while also keeping in mind that completely shutting down economies, not allowing people to leave their houses. I mean, we're both feminists here. We've seen rising rates of domestic violence because people are trapped with their abusers and not able to get help. Like, those are also big concerns.
Absolutely. Would you agree or disagree with the statement that the proper role of government is the protection of the non-aggression principle?
I did tell you I'm ideologically an anarchist. I will say
Right.
that as much as I think that there is a role for government, the role of government is to protect individuals' rights, right? Which is basically what you're saying, the non-aggression principle. Your
Right.
right to swing your arm ends where my nose begins, right?
Right.
Yes, I think that if there is a role for government, the sole role should be to protect other people from infringing upon an individual's
Sure.
what we call negative rights, right? The rights that you
Right.
have, you're able to have without encroaching upon someone else's right to have.
Right. So I'm gonna jump back and kind of because we have a couple more minutes, and I just wanted to take an opportunity to talk about feminism.
Yeah.
My husband is conservative, and so every time I introduce myself as a feminist, because apparently the blue hair and the tattoos don't give it away,
right.
He gets a little embarrassed. So, pop quiz, Kat, as a feminist, do you hate men?
I do not hate men.
As far from it looks, according to your Instagram feed, that you might have even chosen to.
Everybody I'm friends with.
So, according to your Instagram feed, you've chosen to, partner yourself for the rest of your life with a man.
Oh, yeah, right. It's because I hate men so much that I want to.
That's right. That is internalized misogyny at its best. Well done. So one of the, I think there's a really common misconception of feminists that say that what we're out for is inverted oppression. That what we want is for men to be less so that we can be more. And I wonder if you could address that a little bit, especially because you are a libertarian, because you do not believe that it is the government's responsibility to make that right for you. So talk a little bit about inverted oppression.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. This is probably one of the biggest critiques. I don't think it's usually a very well thought out critique, like air quotes, but people do frequently say that feminists don't actually care about equality, or else they would call themselves egalitarians. I get that one a lot. What they actually want is female superiority.
Right.
As with any movement, I will say that there are some people who do have those kinds of views, and I would personally not really consider them a feminist, at least not at all in the way that most people are feminists, right?
Okay.
The definition of feminism, which I like to use, is very similar to the famous one, probably the most famous one from Chinua. No, I forgot her last name suddenly. I think it's Agape, but I can't remember it.
Achebe? Chinua Achebe?
No, yes, that's exactly it.
A grain of wheat.
So bad with names. I'm terrible.
Or things fall apart. Gugi wa Thiong'o is a grain of wheat. I'm sorry. Chinua Achebe.
But she's not a libertarian feminist. However, her definition is a good one. Feminism is the social, political, and cultural equality of the sexes. I would actually take that a step farther and say that that true equality is not just social and political equality, but involves economic equality as well, or more specifically, economic liberty. We are still in a situation where in a significant number of countries around the world, women can't work legally, at least not without the grace of their male guardian allowing them to, right? So we haven't achieved that. I do think that some of the pushback around that is the fact that sometimes people go overboard in the way that they approach things because they feel it's sort of a reactionary thing. We see this in all political movements. People see one thing, so they almost like flip it on its head and say the opposite. But I think the vast majority of where this argument is coming from is actually, unfortunately, it's because they don't like the things that are being brought up. It's not actually an argument being made in good faith, I think, a lot of the time. But that said, I think it's incredibly important that when we look at feminism, we don't just think about it as being good for women. There are many ways in which our society, culturally, legally, economically, can hurt men specifically, or also the number of people who do not identify as male or female are also targeted. So all of those things are a problem. There's any number of issues. And I think that as a feminist, it's really important to me that I look at any time that one gender or one sex is receiving different treatment than someone else, and look at the cause too, right? Because I think that there's sometimes where you see that happening and it's because of a cultural bias, or it's because someone overlooked it, or in the case of things like the tax code or Social Security, which are written very gender neutral, they're written very gender neutral in such a way that it ends up playing out very differently for men and women, right?
Right.
There are other things that were written in a way that are not at all gender neutral, and that's a problem. Then there are also things where, because of biological differences, there needs to be some sort of understanding, right? For instance, when we get to issues around reproduction, there's so maternity leave, paternity leave, right? One of the problems with maternity leave is when you have guaranteed paid maternity leave, women tend to get mommy tracks. Right? So in countries where the government requires a certain amount of paid maternity leave, but not paternity leave, what ends up happening is that women don't move up in they don't get to move up the ladder nearly as well. They don't get moved ahead. They tend to stay in the lower rungs, even if the society itself culturally tends to be more feminist, right? And it's just because of the incentive structure.
Right.
So the way that some people, so what the response seems like is, okay, great, so let's also give paternity leave. This has only been studied a little bit, but in the few studies that I've seen that have come out really well, really good, strong studies about this, there's one in particular. It looks at economists, economics professors, and economic academics who work in settings where both men and women can take maternity and paternity leave. And what they saw was, instead of both the women taking maternity leave and the men taking paternity leave now catching up with each other, and there no longer being a problem of mommy tracking, what they instead saw was that women who took maternity leave were held back in their careers more than all men. However, men who took paternity leave tended to exceed in their careers above men who didn't. Why? Because
we live in a heteronormative female society.
Because the women were using that time to recover from the extremely it's a big medical thing when you have a baby. It just is. You know that. You're a doctor, right? You've been children. You know how this goes. Your body goes through a lot of changes and a lot of things happen, and it's not the same for a woman and a man. It's just not. So women tend to spend that time recovering and taking care of their children. The male economists who were taking paternity leave were not spending that time taking care of their children. They were spending that time doing additional research, writing more papers, publishing more than either the women or the men who didn't take paternity leave, right? And so that's an attempt where we looked at it and it's like, okay, yes, let's just make it gender neutral and it'll be fine. But it's not, because you still have these other cultural things, right? And that's stuff that's changing. I mean, certainly we see, I'm a millennial, I'm 31 years old, and in my generation, it is still very much the case that in a joint family household where you have a man and a woman, when a man and a woman are married, they're both working parents and they both make roughly the same income. The woman still predominantly does the majority of child care and domestic labor, right? Mm-hmm. That's at a much less so than Gen Xers, than boomers, certainly than greatest generation. It's changed. It's changed a lot. It's still happening, right? So those are the sort of cultural changes that are behind this. And so you can't just change with a law. The law itself will not change. We have to think about it on the larger.
Right. And how much of that do you think has come about? Like you said, I'm an elder millennial. I'm 35. So how much of that do you think has come about because of our generation's kind of obsession with identity politics?
I mean, that's what it is, right? Like a lot of this stuff,
right?
People talk about it and then other people realize it and it matters. That's why there is this generational change. If no one had talked about the fact that you have this major discrepancy in who's doing labor, then no one would have changed anything. And so that's part of the problem. not problem, but that's one of the issues with libertarianism, right? Because cultural change takes time, and it takes a lot of people talking about a lot of issues and making changes on an individual level. And
Right.
I think that it's actually more effective in the long run, and it tends to work in a way that makes everyone happier in the long run. However,
Right.
People tend to see it as, if you don't immediately pass a law to change something, you're not doing anything. It's a
Right.
sort of cultural bias where you have to do something, right? Just talking about something, just trying to make changes in your own life, that's not enough. But what we
Right.
see is that actually a lot of times that works out better in the long run.
Absolutely. And, you know, and I think that that's one of the larger themes and the larger ideas, is part of the whole idea for this came about because we have so little dialogue, right? We have debates. There are, you know, always somebody is going off in a wallow text on their Facebook, or somebody's ranting or something like that. We have so little dialogue about what it is that we can actually affect change in. Because the truth of the matter is that at this point, government is a juggernaut. And there is very little short of vive la revolution that is going to actually affect change, except for, like you said, between people and between households, and starting at the bottom and working its way up. And so I wonder if, right before we wrap up, if we could talk about, I know you said you are personally pro-life, but you are politically pro-choice.
Yes, those all abortion bans, yes.
Right. I heard you say like 20 things that New Wave Feminists as an organization, and me myself personally, agree with, except to say that abortion should be legal. And one of the things that that Destiny and Marcia and we were at the University of Wisconsin at Madison right before all of the quarantine and stay-at-home orders came together. And one of the things that we were talking about is that even if Roe is overturned,
it would stay legal.
Right, where it would, I mean, at that point, it would become a states' rights issue. And
right.
The individual states would be making decisions about something like that. But even in states where it was outlawed, I live in Indiana, and so they've been trying to make it illegal here forever. So you're still going to see it happening. It's just going to be low key. It's going to be in a physician's office. We're going to see a lot more incidents of miscarriage, but the problem is
also incidences of actual miscarriages that are then potentially
prosecuted. Right. So, but one of the problems that I think culturally and as a society that we have is that even if Roe were overturned tomorrow and every state in the union made abortion illegal, we are not prepared culturally, sociologically, as a society, as people, as an individual state. We are not prepared to take on an extra 600,000 babies born into the country. Just period. Whether, like, I was a foster kid, and so it makes me really squeamish when people are like, oh, they're just going to be born into foster care. Okay, well, I mean, I'm not better off dead. There are worse things than being poor. So what do we as feminists, we believe in supporting women, in individual responsibility, in banding together to take care of individuals, leave us on a high note, take us out on what our responsibility is to other women who might find themselves in this situation.
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest things we can do is one of the things that I like about New Wave Feminists is I think that you guys don't spend a lot of time shaming women, right? I don't see it coming out of you. And I think that that's one of my problems with the pro-life movement at large, is that a lot of it, they're actively stopping the things that we know would help prevent pregnancies, right? They don't want better sex ed. They don't want availability of birth control. They don't want availability of condoms. They don't want that kinds of stuff, right? So in my view, they're actually contributing to the abortion rate more than they're in any way stopping abortions. but I think what's also true is, I think you kind of touched upon it, but even if we tomorrow made all abortions illegal, right? Like, right now with COVID, a lot of states have essentially made all abortions illegal. There's people aren't going to stop trying, right? Because there's external factors. Women have been ending pregnancies for as long as women have understood that a pregnancy was related to having a baby, right? Which it's funny to think about, but that is still like a knowledge point that people had to learn.
Yep.
In society.
Oh yeah.
But so that won't change it. What we can do is we can create a society that we can create a more pro-life culture. We can create a culture where when you hear people saying negative things about poor mothers, if you hear people saying negative things about, welfare queens with their children or whatever, I'm a libertarian.
That was one lady.
I don't believe in the welfare state. However, I'm not going to shame a woman because she's trying to feed her children, right? I'm much more concerned about the welfare we're giving to make bombs, right, than I am about the welfare going to feed children. So I do think that that's a huge part of it. I think a lot of it also is, in as much as we're able to, when we are in positions of power, whether that is as a hiring manager, whether that is as someone who's managing someone at work, someone who is creating events that could or could not be available to women to bring in children, right? One of the things that I always hit upon is when you ban children from a space, you're effectively banning women from a space, because overwhelmingly women are the ones who are doing this childcare. If you do not allow children, you are really saying that you don't want those women in the space. As a libertarian activist, I've been doing this for a long time, and you start to see women disappear around the mid-20s to mid-30s. They're just not at events. They're not at things. Why are they not there? Because they're home watching their children, right? And so I think that that's a huge part of it. I think it's all of those various things. It's whenever, on whatever small little level, you're able to do something to create a better society, a less misogynistic society, I think a more pro-life society, a truly pro-life, not anti-sex, not pro big government regulating women's bodies, actually embracing what it means to be a woman for a lot of people, right? I'm not saying that having a child is what makes you a woman, but it is a core part of
the feminine identity.
People feel is their womanhood. Right. Not everybody, but a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that when that becomes something that's acceptable to shame, it's an anti-life society. So, no river starts as a river. It always starts as one little drop that trickles down, and then all of these other little drops trickle down. And then eventually we have this big gushing river cutting through mountains. And so all of us as individuals, we are those little drops. And every single day we face decisions, we face abilities to interact with people, we face the opportunity to call in people who are maybe making some misogynistic comments. We have the opportunity to weigh in on a policy at our work that maybe is holding some people back. We have the opportunity to say, actually, you know what? Yeah, women working from home because they have children are not just slacking off. They are actually doing their job. Look at the results. Don't look at what you feel they should be doing to get the results, right? So I think in that way, we are all those little drops, and we get all of those little opportunities to trickle down that mountain together. And if we're all doing that collectively over time, we can cut a pathway through the mountain.
Do you, last thing, apparently I'm having a stroke. Do you think that a society which is truly pro-woman is a society which is necessarily pro-life?
Oh, pro-life.
Now, no, I don't mean anti-abortion. I just mean pro-life. Do you think that a society which is pro-woman is pro-life?
Yes, with the way that you put it, yes.
With the caveat that I don't mean just anti-abortion. I mean,
but I don't think that, not in the sense that pro-life is often used to mean specific political movement that is rampantly misogynistic, right?
And not even pro-life, because I'm pretty
Not pro-life. Yes,
I
people are
spent
nuts. They're
I
literally
spent a minute looking
that
like
cause people who have healthy pregnancies to want to abort their pregnancy, and they're going around saying that they're pro-life. Drives me nuts.
no, it's not how that works.
So I do think
Also, war, not pro-life.
The vast majority of women, the fact that they are capable of having children, not all women are, but enough women are, the vast majority of women are capable of having children, whether or not they choose to do so. That is a significant part of their identity and of the choices that they make in life. And if we have a society that views those choices or that ability as somehow being weak or somehow being lazy or somehow being something to be shamed, then we will fundamentally have a misogynistic society.
Absolutely. And, you know, the oppression of the poor, not pro-life.
Yeah.
War is not pro-life.
Pro-life.
You know, our prison, the way that our prisons and our court system, you know, I think that it is the opportunity and the obligation.
I cannot hear. Unfortunately cut off.
Politicians that are out there talking about how they're so pro-life, you know, most pro-life president ever. We would contend that pro-life should mean womb to tomb, and it includes all of those people. We are not just pro-birth, and we are not simply anti-abortion. And so thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I made bolognese for supper. I'm gonna go shove it